Lesson 162. Explore. Universe. Do you believe that humans will be able to explore the whole of the universe one day?
No, I don't believe that humans will be able to explore the whole of the universe one day.
Accuse. What would you do if you were wrongly accused of a crime?
If I were wrongly accused of a crime, I'd try to get a good lawyer to defend me.
Distinction. What's the distinction between the United Kingdom and Great Britain?
The distinction between the United Kingdom and Great Britain is that the United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland, whereas Great Britain does not.
Defence. Do some countries spend huge amounts of money on defence?
Yes, some countries spend huge amounts of money on defence.
Poem. Poet. What do we call a person who writes poems?
We call a person who writes poems a poet.
Supper. What do we mean by supper?
By supper, we mean the last meal of the day, which could be either dinner or something small that we eat before going to bed.
Moral. Do you think it can ever be morally right to tell a lie?
Yes, I think it can sometimes be morally right to tell a lie.
Permanent. Temporary. What's the difference between a permanent job and a temporary job?
The difference between a permanent job and a temporary job is that a permanent job is one that can last for years, whereas a temporary job only lasts for a short or limited period.
Permit. Permit. What's the difference between permit and permit?
The difference between permit and permit is that permit is a verb, whereas permit is a noun.
How old must a person be before they're legally permitted to drive a car in this country?
A person must be 18 before they're legally permitted to drive a car in this country.
Do you think that's reasonable?
Yes, I think that's reasonable.
Is it sometimes necessary to apply for a work permit before one is allowed to work in a foreign country?
Yes, it's sometimes necessary to apply for a work permit before one is allowed to work in a foreign country.
Scenery. When you go on holiday, what kind of scenery do you prefer?
When I go on holiday, the kind of scenery I prefer is mountain scenery.
Admission. Gallery. Do you think that admission to museums, art galleries, etc. ought to be free and that the government should pay to maintain such places?
Yes, I think that admission to museums, art galleries, etc. ought to be free and that the government should pay to maintain such places.
Barber. Pole. Surgical. What was the old sign for a barber's shop?
The old sign for a barber's shop was a red and white striped pole, which was hung outside.
What did the colour red represent and why?
The colour red represented blood, because in the old days the barber, apart from cutting hair, also used to perform small surgical operations.
Elastic. What do we use elastic bands for?
We use elastic bands for wrapping round things like banknotes, etc. in order to keep them together.
Encourage. Discourage. What's the difference in structure between the verbs encourage and discourage?
The difference in structure between the verbs encourage and discourage is that we encourage someone to do something, whereas we discourage someone from doing something.
If a friend of yours said that they were thinking about travelling around the world alone for a year, would you encourage them to do it or discourage them from doing it?
If a friend of mine said that they were thinking about travelling around the world alone for a year, I'd encourage them to do it.
Why should Callan Method students not feel discouraged when they make mistakes in the lessons?
Callan Method students shouldn't feel discouraged when they make mistakes in the lessons, because making mistakes is a necessary part of the learning process. The students learn from the teacher's constant correction of their mistakes.
Graceful. Which do you think's the most graceful animal in the world?
I think the gazelle is the most graceful animal in the world.
Liberty. Torch. What's the basic meaning of the word liberty?
The basic meaning of the word liberty is the freedom of an individual in society.
Where's the Statue of Liberty?
The Statue of Liberty is at the entrance of New York Harbor.
Describe it, please.
It's a huge statue of a woman representing freedom, which was given to America by France. In her right hand, she holds a torch, etc.
Why do most people keep a torch and a supply of candles in their home?
Most people keep a torch and a supply of candles in their home in case there's a failure in their electricity supply.
Tempt. Donkey. Do you ever feel tempted to move to another country permanently?
No, I never feel tempted to move to another country permanently.
What's the classic way of tempting a donkey to move?
The classic way of tempting a donkey to move is by tying a carrot on a piece of string to the end of a stick and hanging the carrot a step away from the donkey's nose so that he is tempted to move forward to eat it. However, as the stick is fixed to the donkey, the carrot remains out of reach, and so the donkey keeps walking.
Guide. When you visit a place of historic interest, do you prefer to be shown around by a guide?
Yes, when I visit a place of historic interest, I prefer to be shown around by a guide.
Why?
Because I'm very interested in history and like to learn as much as I can.
Engineer. What kind of work does an engineer do?
The kind of work an engineer does is connected with the building of machines, houses, bridges, ships, etc.
Grateful. What kind of gift would you be most grateful to receive for your next birthday?
The kind of gift I'd be most grateful to receive for my next birthday would be a new skateboard.
Urgent. What does it mean when a parcel or document is marked urgent?
When a parcel or document is marked urgent, it means that the person who's sending it wants it to arrive or be attended to as soon as possible.
Explode. If the police believed a bomb was about to explode in a public place, what would they do?
If the police believed a bomb was about to explode in a public place, they would clear the area as quickly as possible.
Precious. Is a person's most precious possession always the one that's worth the most money?
No, a person's most precious possession isn't always the one that's worth the most money.
Which precious metals are usually used to make jewellery?
The precious metals that are usually used to make jewellery are gold and silver.
Hesitate. Why do we sometimes hesitate before doing something?
We sometimes hesitate before doing something because we are not sure what the consequences might be.
Pump. Cyclist. What do we use a pump for?
We use a pump to force liquid or gas from one place to another.
Why should a cyclist always carry a pump on their bicycle?
A cyclist should always carry a pump on their bicycle so that, if they have to mend a puncture by the side of the road, they can pump up the tyre afterwards.
Reproduce. Reproduction. Do most cheap printers have trouble reproducing colours correctly?
Yes, most cheap printers have trouble reproducing colours correctly.
Do you prefer to see good reproductions of famous paintings hanging on the walls in a house, or original paintings by less well-known artists?
I prefer to see good reproductions of famous paintings hanging on the walls in a house than original paintings by less well-known artists.